right, so Wade, you've been a cyber tech here at IG Labs for a little bit now, right? So how long have you been?
Yes, so I've been here for about 6 months now.
Okay, awesome. So I've been assured that there's no relation to Chris Evans, right? Like you guys aren't famously related, or can I get an autograph or something?
It would be great.
Yeah.
It would be great. Me and you both.
Yeah, maybe get a spot in the next Avengers, right? So, coming from a military background, I was coming from the Army, where you were part of the Intel community, transitioning into cybersecurity. What kind of things did you struggle with in that transition? Were there a lot of parallels that you were able to draw from your training in the Intel community as you moved over, or was it kind of like starting from scratch?
So for me, given the Intel background, the training I feel like prepared me for the jump into the cyber world, because my brain and mind was equipped to be able to take on the challenge. It was challenging, I admit, but after just kind of like, for me, I love to learn, so it took me a while to get the basic concepts down. But once I got the basic concepts down of just like the cybersecurity realm of things, it was a pretty smooth transition after that. And then I've had amazing people give me help along the way as well.
That's awesome. And that's one of the things I think, especially in cybersecurity, and for me as a data scientist, also having that Intel background, that hunger for knowledge and that willingness to learn and adapt on the job and look at things from different angles. I think it definitely does prepare you a lot better to take on the challenges that you're going to encounter in these industries. So it's awesome to kind of hear that from your perspective as well, just knowing that it's not something that is a hindrance. It's more of like a propelling force forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I enjoy a challenge, like I said previously, and it's been fun for me just because it's always evolving. Like the cyber world, there's never going to be one way to do things, and that for me is interesting. It's like a puzzle, and just finding the pieces to fit together for me.
Absolutely. Now, in your time here at IG Labs as a cyber tech, you've gotten to see so many amazing things that we're working on, and all the different projects that people have as their like individual projects, and then obviously the grand projects that we put on together as a group. What are some of the interesting things that you've seen just throughout the offices you've been going through?
For me, it goes back to my intern days, doing 3D printing, starting off with that, and then even going into the industrial control systems, trying to learn that. Like, even that's a new challenge for me, so that's been fun. But I'd say by far 3D printing has been fun for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think 3D printing is definitely awesome. We've got our fabrication lab set up. We typically run 4 or 5 different printers. Simultaneously, people are running different projects. And then you mentioned obviously the industrial side of it, which being with cybersecurity, there's got to be some interesting things there. Looking at the physical security and how we're going to be able to protect our nation's infrastructure, and obviously the concerns that exist with things like pipelines and electrical grids and things like that.
Absolutely. And even going back to something that everyone's familiar with, the Colonial Pipeline attack, even that was groundbreaking for everyone out here in the community, and just seeing that, and just the implications that a cyber attack can have on far-reaching. Like, we had people at the gas pumps, for example, like everyone rushing to get gas, and just the basic necessities that we need as people, and people really.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It's one of those things that like the normal person, or even the people in our profession, they might not have it in the forefront of their mind. It might be just kind of like a secondary thought that these things can extend to our everyday lives, and they can have major implications for how we get through the day. And everybody talks about gas prices. Gas prices are always going to be a topic of conversation. When a pipeline goes down because of a cyber attack, and all of a sudden gas jumps, $1, $2 a gallon, it becomes quite problematic. And the outlook is not very good.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
So, you've been here for about 6 months now, and I understand that you've been working on your own project.
Yes. So I've been researching and doing research on object detection. So I've been using the NVIDIA Hello AI World tutorial, and on there they have the Jensen Inference project using object detection. And so it's been really, really, really fun to get into. And for me, it started off by just going to the NVIDIA developer community. And on the community, you see all types of projects that are on there that they have on there. And for me, it was like, where can I start to kind of put my get my foot in the door, and then where can I expand upon once I get the basic concepts down.
Okay. Now, you mentioned NVIDIA. Are you a gamer by chance?
Yeah, absolutely. I play a lot of shooter first-person games like that. I recently just purchased my first pre-built PC, and it has
Nice.
an NVIDIA graphics card in it, the 3070 Ti.
Okay. Yeah, so for me, I'm a gamer. I also bought a pre-build. I'm not as fancy as some of the other people in our office who, build them from ground up, and they just go do all of the different pieces on their own. But I always thought NVIDIA of just being that graphics card manufacturer, right? Like every time I needed to upgrade, it was always going scouting what was the best, NVIDIA's graphics card out there. So what was it like seeing a different side of NVIDIA?
Okay, so for me, I'll go back a little. So since I've been here at the company, I've been attending the GTC conferences that NVIDIA hosts, and it goes back to seeing things that are doing in the medical field. They have like the image detection that they're making great advances in the medical field to autonomous vehicles. So for me, it's like, wow, that's a lot that NVIDIA is doing.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm personally, it's amazing to think of like what people would consider a definitely primary factor in games and the advancements that we've experienced with video games, and being able to do things like virtual reality and having these just unimaginable sequences in visuals, and then now looking at the things that they're doing for things like you mentioned the medical field. One of the more inspiring things I think I've read recently for them is trying to identify cancer. And going through and actually being able to do so sooner, right, than the traditional methods and doctors, which obviously is just an augment to our existing medical professionals, and not in any way trying to replace them. But to me, like that's a very inspiring cause to try and see if we can increase the time that we have to treat some of these patients.
Yeah, and absolutely. And as you go into the developer community, you see different projects that people are doing for good. For example, I came across a project where for people that are blind or visually impaired, they created a project using glasses, using a Jetson Nano, for example. And literally, if someone was walking, the glasses would tap the person for the direction to avoid objects in the way. So, as like you say, and there's so many different great things that you can do with the NVIDIA Jetson platforms.
Absolutely. Now, obviously, you've been working on this project for a little while now. We're going to go ahead and we're going to transition over. We're going to move into our IG Lab's data lab. Okay. We'll kind of get a rundown of the project. We'll kind of see what you've done to establish the setup, the kind of effort that it took, hardware, software, all that kind of stuff that you needed to get started.
Okay.
And then we'll kind of see it in action.
All right, sounds good.
All right. So Wade, we've got you set up here in the IG Data Lab over here at IG Labs. You've been working on this object detection project for a little while now. Can you kind of just walk us through what we're seeing with what's on the screen and how you've got this set up?
Yeah. So on the screen right here is the object detection program that I have running currently. It's using a simple USB camera that I have pointed out to the parking lot. And what you can see here on the screen is it's detecting cars, and it's also picking up the trucks as well right there. And going back to earlier where I mentioned the script, in the Python script with the threshold, I have it set on 0.25, so it's able to pick up more objects in the parking lot. And for example, if I was to raise that to a 0.5, then you may get 1 or 2 vehicles detected in the parking lot.
Awesome. Now, I noticed that there's some fluttering going on with one of the images where it seems like it can't make up its mind if it's a car or a truck. Is that something that we could further refine, or is that something...
So absolutely, you can further retrain the model to get that confidence value up a little higher. That way it's like, okay, is this a car or a truck? Let's retrain this and make it so it's actually detecting that that's a truck. So there's just a retraining process that we would have to do for the model, just simply retrain the model. I say simply, but not necessarily simply. Like my first time, for example, lesson learned from this project was that retraining the model and I got a disk error right when I went to reboot the program. For me, that was soul crushing and heartbreaking because I didn't have another image of my progress saved, so that consisted of me re-downloading the project and everything from scratch. And lesson learned for anyone doing this, make sure you always save an image of your most current work.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, there's nothing worse than getting hours and hours poured into a project and then realizing that nothing's saved and it all comes crashing down around you.
Yeah.
Right? It's definitely soul crushing. One of the things that I think is phenomenal about your setup here is you've actually got it to where it's picking up cars as they're coming into the parking lot, not just static. And we actually just saw one go across the screen there, and it was able to pick it up. To me, that is just phenomenal. Was there any kind of difficulty that you had when first getting set up for it to be able to pick up those cars as they were moving, or was it more about the threshold settings that you mentioned earlier?
So initially, my initial thought was that maybe I needed a better camera because when I initially pointed it out in the parking lot, it wasn't detecting anything. And then that goes into what you were saying earlier about the angles and different things of that sort. And then going into the settings and refining the camera so it's able to, I had to zoom in a little bit so it's able to actually pick up the cars and vehicles moving. Earlier when I first had this going, it for instance, it had the whole back row of cars was a bus. Obviously there's no buses in the parking lot, but that was a little head scratching for me and just doing research and like, okay, I need to further refine the camera. And once I did that, it was like, wow, took my vehicle, went out to the parking lot and had our chief technologist in here as I drove by, and it was like, okay, it's picking up my car as I'm moving. Okay, great.
Awesome. Yeah, it could be probably a little bit of a surprise when you go into trying to fix the problem, right? Like you said, it's picking up buses. Obviously, there's not a bus out there. I know my brain automatically goes to the worst case scenario and like the most stressful fix. It was probably a little bit of a surprise that it was just something as simple as getting the zoom and tinkering a little bit to get it to pick up what you wanted to.
Yeah, absolutely. I was like, oh man, what do I do next? Do I have to start this thing from scratch? How can I get this to detect what I wanted to detect? And like you say, it was great to just know that it was simply just going into the settings and just fine-tuning them a little bit.
Awesome. Now, you mentioned that your ultimate end goal with this project is to be able to detect aircraft coming into BWI since we are so close. Have you attempted that yet?
I haven't been able to because, believe it or not, before this project, you could hear aircraft going by every 5 minutes, but my anxiety and anticipation of wanting to capture aircraft have not had any success actually seeing any aircraft come through, unfortunately.
So the aircraft all figured out that you were looking for them, and now they're like, no, we're just going to avoid that window.
Pretty much. But to further play with object detection a little more, like I might not have the aircraft up in the sky now, so I took my setup and moved it over to our classroom, which faces the parkway, and there's a lot of traffic that flows along the parkway, and it's a pretty far distance as well. So I was like, okay, let's play with the camera settings a little more, and I increased the zoom a little bit, and for it to be a fairly busy parkway where cars are traveling going 40 to 50 miles per hour, it was able to detect cars as they were passing by as well. So not quite the aircraft that I wanted to get, but still another good step in the right direction, if you ask me.
Absolutely. You got to take those victories like we said earlier, right? So getting those incremental victories as you're working on this project and continuing to refine it are only going to make you that much more successful when it is time to come up against that aircraft. So obviously here sitting in the parking lot, you're picking up a lot of different vehicles and things like that. I wanted to point out one of the things that I saw, you mentioned the developer community and the projects that they have going on there. There was actually a really interesting project that I saw where somebody was using a similar setup as the one that you've got here, but they were specifically training their model to identify objects being thrown out of a vehicle. So they were looking at people who were littering, right? And they were trying to use object detection to catch people littering across highways and roadways and things of that nature. So when you're looking at how specifically you have to train a model to get to that level, what are some of the steps, what are some of the nuances that you've learned just by being able to differentiate between cars and trucks, and then also with smaller objects? What are some of the nuances that you've learned and had to kind of work through?
So for me, it was just playing with the camera and not having the background so crowded initially. So for me, start small, just trying to get that one object, and then I just started throwing more objects at it just to see how much it can actually handle. So I definitely say start small. So like for example, in that project, they probably just started with the object trash. There's just training their model to just identify different types of trash and things like that, and just classifying each image. So for that project, I'd imagine it probably took a little bit to actually train the model, and I'd actually be curious to see that. So I'll have to check that out for myself as well, just to look at the code and just out of curiosity, since I love to learn, just to see what all went into that.
Yeah, absolutely. Every project's going to be different. Everything's going to have its own unique challenges and things that you have to work around. I just thought it was super interesting, considering when we're looking here, obviously at your setup with the cars, right? Now getting even more refined, focusing in not just on the car itself, but maybe adding another layer of object detection where they now have to identify something leaving that car.
Yeah. So good point that you mentioned that. So I've actually had this set up. So as you can see, actually right now we have it on the screen. We have people walking towards their vehicles and getting into their vehicles. So it's actually able to distinguish people walking to their vehicles and as they're exiting their vehicles as well. So it's actually kind of cool that we happen to have it happen right here live.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, you couldn't time that better. So one of the things that obviously everybody's going to be curious about now that they've seen it in action, now that they can see the potentials of a object detection project, is what did it take to get this set up? Right now, we mentioned earlier the camera, and obviously very surprising that it's just a USB camera. Obviously, that you've got set up here on your tripod to just get the better angle of the parking lot. But what else went into the setup? You mentioned the Jetson AI. Can you walk me through a little bit more on that setup piece?
Yeah. So to get this project going, we have here a Jetson Nano. You can use this, which is just a smaller version of the Xavier NX. Still gets the job done great. And simply all you need from there, you go to the Jetson downloader, you download the image that they have on their website. Once you get that image downloaded, you can go to the Hello AI World tutorial, that GitHub project, and just start working your way through. But surprisingly, the Jetson or Xavier NX in this case, which I'm using, your keyboard, mouse, a display, and a USB camera is all you need to get this project up and going.
So that's not a lot to get this project up and running. Now, I noticed that the Jetson Xavier that you've got running for the project is actually housed in what looks like a pretty cool looking case. Can you tell me where you got that case from?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a case here. We actually 3D printed this case ourselves in our fabrication lab.
All right, so that's it for Talk Data to Me. I'm Chandler Province. Thank you again, Wade, for coming out and sharing your project with us. How much fun has it been to work on this object detection for the first time?
It's been great. Like I said earlier, I really, really enjoy learning. So for me, something brand new tech-wise, it was like, man, let's see what we can make happen. It was just the curiosity for me, peeking, just looking at the different projects in the developer community, and it was like, okay, I'm an Intel guy, so let's take this new avenue and let's see what we can make happen. But for me, it was a lot of fun, a lot of trials and tribulations along the way, successes, failures, going home, happy moments as well, going home telling my family like, oh man, I did this great thing at work today, and just them not really understanding the full extent of what I did, but just me expressing my excitement. They were happy for me as well. So it's been great to learn just foundational knowledge about object detection, and I'm excited to see where I can go next. So hopefully, for our next podcast or something, you're here looking at a project that I've built myself.
Absolutely. I look forward to it. I also want to reiterate that there also is the Deep Learning Institute that you mentioned that's also hosted by NVIDIA. There's several classes out there that you can take through them. Some are free, some are paid classes as well. But definitely a great place to start to really get a good foundational understanding with how AI works, especially from NVIDIA's perspective with their pre-trained models and the packages that they've rolled out for people to get started with these projects. This has been Talk Data to Me, presented by IG Labs. We hope to see you next time.